When a strange signal emerges from beyond the edge of known space, humanity hesitates, afraid of what might be calling from the silence. But one man, Commander Elias Ward, volunteers to go alone. His mission is simple: locate the source and return with proof. Yet when he arrives, he finds something beyond comprehension. An immense, living structure drifting in the void, ancient and half alive, whispering through static. Inside, he discovers a single figure suspended in stasis. An alien queen of impossible beauty and power, the last survivor of a lost civilization. Every protocol forbids contact, but something about her presence pulls at him. When his hand brushes the crystal surface of her chamber, the structure awakens. Light floods through the corridors, systems hum back to life, and her eyes open for the first time in centuries. Trapped together in the heart of an alien tomb, they begin to understand each other. Not through words, but through memory and emotion. Every touch between them shares fragments of her past. Betrayal, war, and a fall so catastrophic it reshaped the stars. But as the human fleet draws near, mistaking the awakening for a threat, Elias must decide whether to obey his orders or protect what he's just brought back to life. And somewhere in the darkness, something else is watching, waiting for him to make that choice. The stars were unusually silent that night, the void beyond the edge of known space stretching like a black ocean, indifferent to the tiny ships scuttling through it. On the bridge of the Aegis Vanguard, Commander Elias Ward stared at the blinking console, the soft hum of the ship the only sound that dared to compete with the silence outside. The signal had arrived 2 hours ago, a frequency unlike any recorded by human explorers, emanating from the dead zone. A sector long considered a graveyard of lost ships and forgotten civilizations. Every probe humanity had sent into that region had vanished without a trace. And yet, here it was, a pulse, precise, almost deliberate, weaving through the static as if trying to speak. The room was tense. Officers exchanged glances, voices low, almost fearful. "Commander," said Lieutenant Maravas, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, "all readings suggest it's alive. Nothing in human history behaves like this." Elias leaned forward, eyes fixed on the spectral pattern scrolling across the monitor. The pulse was steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. His mind raced, calculating risks, probabilities, chances of survival, and still he felt an inexplicable pull. The warnings of the Fleet Council echoed in his memory. No one who goes into the dead zone comes back. Ships vanish. Minds fracture. You'll be alone. But something deeper tugged at him, a combination of curiosity and defiance. "I'll go," he said quietly, the words barely audible over the console hum. Silence filled the bridge. Mara's eyes widened. "Sir, you're not seriously considering—" "Yes," he interrupted gently. "I'm going." No one else volunteered. No one else would. The officers knew better than to argue. Elias had always been that kind of man, a mix of stubbornness and courage that bordered on reckless. His reputation was built on surviving impossible odds, not following orders. He gathered the mission essentials: a solo shuttle, a compact energy shield generator, and a sequence of emergency beacons designed to mark his path. Though he knew in the dead zone, beacons were more symbolic than functional. As the Aegis Vanguard released him, the cold emptiness of the void swallowed the shuttle. The dead zone was more than a dark sector. It was a place where the laws of nature seemed to bend. Sensors went wild, space warped subtly around him, light bending in unnatural ways. The stars themselves appeared scattered, some brighter, some blinking out entirely, as if afraid to shine here. He gripped the controls with steady hands, feeling a mixture of exhilaration and dread. Hours passed. Or was it days? Time seemed to stretch, compress, and sometimes vanish altogether. His internal chronometer was the only anchor, reminding him that he had left home, left safety, left every known law of physics behind. Then he saw it, a structure impossibly massive, floating in the void like a relic from a time before humanity. It was organic and artificial all at once, its surfaces glowing faintly with bioluminescent veins, patterns pulsing in synchrony with the signal that had drawn him here. No human ship had ever been this close. No probe had ever returned with data this rich. His breath caught. The shuttle slowed as if sensing the weight of what lay ahead, the structure unfolding before him like a sleeping giant. His communications array crackled. "Commander Ward, do you read us? Respond." It was Lieutenant Voss. "Do you see it? Do you understand what you've found?" I think I do," he whispered, but even as he spoke, he knew words could not capture the enormity. There were towers and spires, spiraling upwards in impossible geometries, surfaces that seemed alive, shifting subtly with his gaze. The pulse was stronger here, almost palpable, like a heart beating beneath a transparent chest. He felt it in his chest as well, an echo, a resonance that made his bones vibrate in sync with something ancient and intelligent. The ship hovered at the edge of the structure. Sensors indicated chambers and corridors, massive enough to house cities, yet impossibly delicate, almost fragile in their organic design. And then the pulse changed. It intensified, faster, more insistent, as if acknowledging his presence. Elias swallowed hard. This was not merely a signal. It was a beckoning. Someone or something was alive within. A warning light flashed on the shuttle console. Unidentified energy patterns. The kind that could tear apart a ship if misjudged. His hand hovered over the controls. He knew the odds. One wrong move and he would become another ghost in the dead zone. Yet, every instinct told him to continue, to touch, to discover. The main entryway loomed. A doorway formed of intertwined metallic and organic strands, vibrating softly with energy. As he approached, the pulse changed again. This time, it was almost rhythmic, like a message encoded in light, waiting for him to respond. Hesitation flickered in his mind. He remembered the stories of explorers lost to the dead zone, some driven mad by hallucinations, others disappearing without a trace. But the stories were incomplete, myths made from fear. Here, in the cold vacuum of space, he felt something real waiting. He activated the external clamps of the shuttle and touched down on the structure's surface. The hull beneath him was alive. Microcurrents of energy ran through his gloves, a tingle that reached his spine. And then, faintly, he heard it, not with ears, but in his mind. A pulse echoing, almost like a heartbeat, but older, wiser, infinite. It was the signal he had come to find, the reason humanity had never returned. And it was alive. Elias exhaled slowly. Every rational thought screamed at him to retreat, to leave while he still could. Every warning from his superiors, every data point from past missions, every logical calculation insisted he turn back. But as his hand hovered over the glowing surface, he knew that hesitation was impossible. Some things were larger than fear, larger than protocol, larger than humanity itself. And so he touched. The pulse changed instantly. Light erupted from the walls of the chamber, flooding the shuttle and surrounding void with a brilliance that made stars look dim by comparison. Energy ran through his body, not harmful but transformative, as if the structure itself was assessing him, measuring him, acknowledging him. The signal that had haunted human sensors for decades was no longer a distant pattern. It was alive, aware, and responding. A shiver ran down his spine. He realized then that he had crossed a threshold, a line no human had ever dared to approach. And somewhere deep within the structure, a presence stirred. Something vast, something waiting, something alive. And it was aware of him. Elias's heart pounded, a mixture of fear, awe, and exhilaration. The dead zone was no longer dead, and he was no longer merely a human in space. He had made contact. He did not know if he would survive what came next. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The void swallowed the shuttle like black silk, folding around it in silence, so complete it pressed against his ears. Commander Elias Ward's hands were steady on the controls, though his mind raced. Beyond the dead zone, the usual hum of distant stars, the faint static of distant satellites, even the soft vibration of cosmic dust, all of it vanished. It was a silence so absolute that every movement of the shuttle felt amplified, every thought unshielded. exposed. He glanced at the console, signal strength diminishing. Once he crossed the threshold into alien territory, the sensors warned, no signal escapes here. No human voice, no probe, no warning. Alone. Completely alone. And yet, the pulse persisted, faint but unbroken, guiding him deeper. The pattern had changed since he touched the structure in the dead zone. It was no longer a simple heartbeat. It was layered, complex, almost conversational. Elias felt it in his chest, as if the void itself were speaking through him. There was an intelligence here, deliberate and patient, older than humanity, watching, waiting. He navigated through currents of faint energy that made the shuttle's hull vibrate in subtle, unsettling ways. The navigation system struggled to interpret the space around him. The instruments quivered at patterns they could not compute. Shapes flickered at the edge of the viewport, forms that might have been walls, corridors, or the massive limbs of some long-forgotten creature. The pulse grew stronger, almost urgent, compelling him forward. Every instinct screamed caution. Every rational thought demanded retreat. And yet he pressed on. Hours or perhaps days passed. Time had a different rhythm here. His sleep cycles blurred, hunger and thirst reduced to distant afterthoughts. Yet he did not slow. The shuttle glided along an invisible current, drawn toward something monumental. And then he saw it. A structure beyond imagination, looming against the infinite dark. It was alive. The enormous form floated silently, an impossibly massive fusion of organic tissue and machinery. Its surface pulsed with faint light, veins of energy running like rivers across alien stone and flesh, patterns moving with purpose and awareness. Entire sections of the hull shimmered, twisting and rearranging themselves subtly, as if breathing. Sensors went wild, unable to classify materials or measure weight. The pulse from the signal coalesced here, faster now, a chorus of energies that pressed against him through the ship's hull. He could feel the structure's presence, not as a machine or building, but as a sentient entity that had existed long before humanity was born. Elias's breath caught. The shuttle's external lights revealed a network of spires, towers, and bridges, all woven together like the skeleton of a living city, stretching far beyond the viewport. The corridors between these structures were enormous, cathedral-like, carved with flowing lines that seemed almost biological. He realized, with a shock that made his stomach twist, that this was the remains of a living empire, a civilization whose size, complexity, and intelligence dwarfed human understanding. And it was dying, or at least waiting. He maneuvered closer. The shuttle passed over an enormous basin that glimmered faintly, filled with liquid that reflected starlight and shadows, yet seemed to move of its own accord. Faint echoes of energy rippled across the surface. He could almost hear whispers, memories of the empire, lost and lingering in the structure. His fingers tightened on the controls. To touch it, to enter it, would be to step into the heart of a world that had survived millennia in silence. Then the pulse shifted. A pattern emerged within the static, a symbol or perhaps a signature. He could not read it, could not translate it, yet recognition surged through him. It was deliberate, personal, almost welcoming, and it seemed to target him, aligning with the shuttle's trajectory. Elias exhaled, a mix of fear and awe. Somewhere inside that colossal structure, intelligence waited. It knew he had arrived. He activated the shuttle's external sensors, probing the surface. Energy readings spiked, bioelectric currents that ran through the walls, through what he now realized was a fusion of flesh and metal, neuron and circuit. He watched, entranced, as faint bioluminescent pulses traced patterns like veins, each flicker resonating with the pulse he had followed from the dead zone. He touched the control panel instinctively. A thought not his own seemed to press against his mind, curious, cautious, ancient. Elias's training screamed at him to retreat. But retreat meant leaving the Queen, leaving the signal, leaving the reason he had come. And he could not. He guided the shuttle to a large docking chamber, the entrance enormous, woven with sinew-like conduits that glowed faintly under his lights. The walls seemed alive, undulating subtly as though breathing. As the shuttle approached, the pulse accelerated, syncing with the vibrations of the docking clamps. The air, or what passed for air in this alien void, was thick with energy, making his skin tingle and hair stand on end. He stepped out of the shuttle. Gravity was minimal but perceptible, tugging at his body in a subtle rhythm. He could feel the structure beneath him, alive, responsive, almost sentient. Every footfall echoed, not in sound, but in resonance. A vibration that traveled through bone and muscle, a message of awareness. Elias paused, placing a hand on the alien floor. There was warmth, faint and pulsing, as if the Empire itself were welcoming him, or testing him. And then he saw it. Through the organic corridors and sweeping arches of the immense chamber ahead, a faint glow shimmered. It was subtle, ethereal, yet undeniable. A crystal pod, suspended in the center of a massive circular room. Energy pulses radiated from it, the same pulse he had tracked across the dead zone, only magnified, controlled, and aware. The pod appeared to contain something or someone, alive and silent, wrapped in centuries of stasis. Elias's heart pounded. Sensors could not penetrate the crystalline surface, but he could feel life within it. Not just life, but intelligence. And not just intelligence, history, memory, grief, and power concentrated in a single silent being. He understood instantly that this was no ordinary alien. This was royalty, a figure of a civilization lost, yet preserved, waiting for a moment that only he had arrived to provide. He knew the stories, the legends of explorers venturing into the dead zone, never returning. The warnings of fleets, bureaucrats, and scientists alike. Yet standing here before the pulse and the pod, he felt a certainty that surpassed fear. Some things were larger than survival. Some things demanded courage, not protocol. Some things demanded contact. Elias took a deep breath. The structure's pulse synced with his own heartbeat, and he realized that nothing could have prepared him for what lay ahead. Every instinct screamed caution. Every rational thought screamed retreat. But he had come this far, and the answer waited in silence. With deliberate steps, he advanced toward the glowing pod, knowing that humanity's history, and perhaps the fate of countless worlds, would pivot on the next moment. The chamber was impossibly vast, its ceilings lost in shadow, the walls alive with faint pulses of light that rippled like water over stone. Commander Elias Ward stepped cautiously, every movement measured, every breath shallow. The air, what passed for air in this alien tomb, was thick with energy, vibrating with a rhythm that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. The shuttle behind him hummed softly, lights reflecting off the organic walls, but he hardly noticed. All his attention was drawn forward, toward the glowing pod at the heart of the room. It was enormous, crystalline, and flawless, suspended within a lattice of veins that pulsed faintly, as if feeding or guarding it. The pod emitted a soft, steady light, and Elias felt its presence not just with his eyes, but with every nerve ending. There was intelligence here, ancient and deliberate, layered beneath centuries of silence. He approached slowly, aware that one wrong step could trigger defensive measures he could not predict, or worse, awaken something he was not ready to meet. As he neared, he noticed patterns on the pod's surface, etched circuits that resembled veins, intertwining like threads of memory. Tiny flickers of light traveled through these veins in intricate sequences, almost as if the pod were communicating, speaking in a language older than any human could understand. Elias touched the surface lightly, brushing a fingertip across its cool exterior. The response was instantaneous. A pulse raced through him, not painful, but electric, intrusive, as if the pod itself were testing him. The crystalline surface shimmered beneath his hand, light spilling out in thin arcs, weaving over his gloves and onto his forearm. He withdrew instinctively, heart hammering, but curiosity anchored him. He dared a second touch, pressing his palm fully against the pod. The light surged, brighter this time, and he heard something. A voice? No, not a voice. A sensation, a thought, a memory, sliding into his consciousness like water into a riverbed. He stumbled backward, mind reeling. Faces flashed before him, not his own, not human. Alien features. Tall, elongated, luminescent eyes, faces that had seen centuries of glory and betrayal. Cities of impossible scale burned, towers collapsing, waves consuming streets, cries echoing across worlds he had never known existed. And beneath it all, one presence. The Queen, a being of authority and power, of loss and endurance, suspended in stasis for longer than human history could measure. Elias's breath caught. This was not just a survivor. This was royalty, the last of her kind. The weight of that realization pressed against him, heavier than the vacuum outside, heavier than the void itself. He knew the rules. Never touch alien artifacts of unknown origin. Protocols forbade interference. Humanity's history was littered with explorers who thought curiosity could replace caution, and who had vanished in the aftermath. Yet he could not stop. The pull was too strong, the presence too insistent. He placed both hands on the pod. The light shifted, coalescing into lines that traced the contours of a figure within. Tall, regal, elegant in ways that defied gravity and human logic. As he pressed, the crystalline surface seemed to yield, almost breathing around his fingers. The pulse quickened, resonating deep within him, shaking his core. And then, slowly, impossibly, the stasis field began to shimmer. The Queen stirred. It began with a flicker of movement. An arm lifted slightly, fingers stretching inside the crystalline encasement. Elias stepped back, heart hammering, mind screaming in disbelief. The figure's eyes opened. Not human, yet intelligent beyond comprehension, glowing faintly, piercing him in ways words could never convey. They were eyes that had seen eons, that had ruled empires and witnessed their fall. And now they were focused entirely on him. The room pulsed in sync with her awakening. Every wall, every vein of the structure, every faint flicker of bioluminescent light seemed to acknowledge her revival. Elias realized, with a thrill that bordered on terror, that he had not merely awakened her. He had become a participant in the very life force of her civilization. The pulse he had followed across the void was hers, and now it beat in harmony with his own. "Who are you?" he whispered, though the words felt inadequate, fragile. The Queen did not speak, or perhaps her language was beyond sound. Instead, a wave of thought, memory, and emotion washed over him. He saw herself, the last queen, suspended in frozen time, carried across light years by unknown forces, trapped by betrayal, abandoned by allies, mourning the collapse of everything she had loved and built. He felt her confusion, her fear, her latent fury, and beneath it all, a quiet hope. He staggered backward, struggling to comprehend the flood of sensation. Yet amid the chaos, a connection formed. The pod's surface pulsed beneath his palms, and he felt it, not merely through touch, but in mind and body. She was aware of him, curious, hesitant, judging, and when he pressed again, deliberately this time, she responded, the crystalline walls glowing brighter, light radiating outward in synchronized arcs, echoing in every corner of the chamber. Elias realized then the immensity of what he had done. One touch had bridged eons of solitude. One touch had crossed the barrier of species, of time, of understanding. He had no way to measure the consequences. He did not know if she would be friendly, or if awakening her meant death for him and possibly for all of humanity. And yet he could not stop. There was no going back. The Queen lifted fully within the pod, the crystalline encasement retreating slowly as though recognizing his presence as safe or inevitable. Her form was breathtaking. Elongated limbs, a regal bearing that radiated authority, skin shimmering with subtle luminescence, eyes glowing with an intelligence and depth that made his own mortality feel suddenly fragile. She did not speak, but the room filled with energy, a language beyond sound, a presence that pressed against every nerve in his body. Then, a sound not hers but from the structure itself. A low hum, like 1,000 voices vibrating in unison, resonating with the pulse he had tracked, the heartbeat of an empire revived. The Queen's eyes met his fully, and he felt something profound, acknowledgement, recognition, and perhaps expectation. Elias swallowed hard. He had broken rules older than humanity, touched a being no human had ever dared, and now he stood before the last of a civilization. He could feel her thoughts brushing against his own, probing, curious, measuring. It was not merely first contact. It was the beginning of a bond that could reshape both their worlds. The crystal pod finally retracted completely, the queen standing free in the glowing chamber. Light flowed around her like liquid, refracting across the walls, amplifying every pulse of energy, every flicker of bioluminescence. She extended a hand, not toward him but toward the air, testing the gravity of the chamber, testing the weight of existence itself. Elias's fingers itched to reach out, to touch her again. Against every law, every warning, every instinct drilled into him since his first mission, he stepped closer. His hand hovered in the space between them, trembling, yet compelled forward. The queen's gaze did not waver. It was a challenge, an invitation, a warning, all at once. He pressed forward, and when their hands finally met, a surge of light and energy pulsed through the chamber, resonating in every wall, every vein, every silent corridor of the living fortress. The pulse he had followed from across the dead zone now spoke in full. Alive, intelligent, awakened. And for the first time, humanity's touch had bridged the void, reaching across eons, across species, across silence itself. Elias's mind reeled, not from fear, but from awe. He had awakened the last queen of her kind, and nothing, neither human law nor the cold darkness of space, would ever be the same again. The chamber fell into silence, but it was no ordinary quiet. The air vibrated with energy, faint hums echoing from the walls, veins of light coursing rhythmically, almost impatiently, as if urging the next move. Commander Elias Ward's heart raced, not with fear, but with a sense of destiny he could not name. The queen stood before him, motionless, luminous eyes locked onto his, and yet there was no word, no sound. Communication, as humans understood it, was impossible. Any attempt at speech felt meaningless, inadequate against the enormity of her presence. Elias hesitated, then slowly raised his hand. He did not know why, only that it felt instinctive, an act of acknowledgement, of peace. The queen's gaze softened imperceptibly. She raised a hand of her own, her elongated fingers shimmering faintly with internal light. The distance between them closed not through words, but through movement, subtle and deliberate. Elias's palm hovered above hers, and when their hands finally met, a shock ran through him. Not electric, but deep, resonant, intrusive, pulling at memories and sensations that were not his own. He staggered back instinctively, gasping. He felt a city burn. Not human cities, not places he had ever seen, but alien streets, towers collapsing, molten rivers carving through avenues lined with alien trees whose bioluminescent leaves withered in seconds. Voices, alien, musical, urgent, echoed in his mind. He realized with a jolt. These were memories, her memories, flowing into him through the touch. And then another wave, betrayal. Her children, her advisors, her generals, turning against her in the time before the dead zone claimed their worlds. Entire fleets sent to exterminate allies, to secure power for themselves. And she had survived, trapped, frozen in stasis, abandoned by those who should have protected her. Elias's stomach turned. The stories he had read of interstellar politics, of human betrayals, paled against the scale of loss and deceit. The weight of centuries pressed against him, yet he could not withdraw. Not now. The queen's hand moved subtly, guiding his own, and Elias felt something profound. She was testing him, probing him for trust. Another wave surged, her fear. Not fear of him, but fear of humans. The memories were sharp, stinging, fragments of encounters with others who had come too close, touched too much, who had sought power or conquest. Every life she had saved, every civilization she had protected, was tinged with suspicion of those she encountered afterward. And here he was, a human, standing before her, touching her hand. Yet with that fear there was also curiosity. Her memories revealed glimpses of her hope, tiny sparks flickering in the darkness of her solitude. Elias realized then that their connection had to be mutual. He began to allow himself to share as well. Not through words, not through speech, but through intention, emotion, presence. The queen recoiled slightly at first, as if sensing his memories, his human impulses, his capacity for both creation and destruction. Then she seemed to relax, accepting the truth that not all humans were threats, that some might carry courage not born of arrogance but of empathy. Their hands moved together, like dancers learning a new language. Every gesture, every brush of fingers, became communication. Through it, Elias saw her world in fragments. Vistas of impossibly tall structures carved from living rock, oceans that shimmered with colors unknown to human eyes, forests that sang and whispered in harmony with the stars. He felt her triumphs, the pride of her empire at its zenith, the sorrow as it fell, the slow erosion of hope over centuries of exile. And with each pulse of energy through their joined hands, she learned of him, of humanity's resilience, of the risks he had taken to reach her, of the compassion that had driven him to this very chamber despite the warnings. Yet tension built. He could sense it in her touch, the wariness of centuries, the instinct to defend, to judge, to survive. And he understood that she was testing him, not merely for physical safety, but for worthiness. Could he be trusted with the knowledge she had guarded for eons? Could a human, the representative of a species that had destroyed its own worlds, understand and protect what remained of hers? Hours seemed to pass in mere minutes, time warped in the alien chamber. The pulse of the structure around them intensified, syncing with the rhythm of their shared consciousness. Every wall, every vein of light, seemed to hum with anticipation, waiting to see what would emerge from this first contact. Elias felt exhaustion creeping into his limbs, yet his mind remained sharp, locked onto her presence, reading the subtle micro-expressions of her luminous eyes, the smallest shifts in tone as memories transferred between them. A sudden jolt of emotion hit him, a memory of betrayal sharper than any before. One of her advisors, closest to her, had orchestrated the collapse of her fleet, turning allies into enemies, leaving her alone to face annihilation. Elias shivered at the raw intensity, the weight of trust broken, the sting of isolation. And yet, even in that memory, there was resilience, a spark of unbroken will that had allowed her to survive centuries in stasis. He mirrored her movements carefully, guiding their hands into new gestures, subtle rotations, gentle presses, communicating his understanding, his recognition of her suffering. Slowly, ever so slowly, the intensity of fear diminished. A tentative trust formed, fragile but real, like the first thread spun across a canyon, bridging two worlds. The queen's eyes softened further, a spark of awareness, a hint of something like approval or acceptance, flickering within the luminescent depths. Then, abruptly, a shift. A pulse unlike the others surged from the walls, strong and insistent. Elias felt it in his chest, vibrating through bone and muscle. The queen's grip tightened momentarily, then relaxed, guiding him to match her rhythm. The signal, the same one that had drawn him across the dead zone, the one humanity had tracked for decades, was reacting to their connection. It was alive, sentient, and attuned to this new bond forming between human and alien. Elias realized that their touch had done more than communicate. They were activating something within the fortress. Every corridor pulsed in sync with their hands, light streaming across walls in patterns that resembled energy veins awakening after centuries of dormancy. He felt a thrill of awe and a spike of fear simultaneously. This was no longer merely first contact. This was interaction at a scale humanity had never imagined, a communion with the last pulse of an empire. The queen withdrew her hand slightly, studying him with intensity. He mirrored her movement, keeping a respectful distance but maintaining the connection through their gestures. The air vibrated with energy, almost tactile now, like the pulse had become a living language. He understood that this was not merely exchange of memories. It was testing, assessment, and invitation all at once. Elias's mind raced, contemplating the magnitude of the moment. He could feel her centuries of experience, her triumphs and losses, her cautious hope, and now her consideration of him, of humanity, and what they might represent. Each movement, each touch, each pulse was a sentence in a language older than any human could speak. And yet, he understood it instinctively, not through logic, but through presence, courage, and the willingness to engage honestly, without pretense or fear. Hours or moments later, the rhythm of their gestures slowed, the pulse of the chamber settling into a steady hum, almost a lullaby. The Queen's eyes met his fully, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Trust had begun to form, delicate and fragile, but real. Elias knew the next step would be more dangerous, more profound. But for the first time, he felt that they were no longer merely observer and subject, human and alien, but participants in a shared experience, a dialogue that transcended species, time, and fear. And in that silence, amid the glow of the fortress and the rhythm of their joined hands, Elias understood a truth that chilled and exhilarated him in equal measure. Contact had been made, not with words, but with understanding, and nothing could remain unchanged. The distant hum of engines broke the fragile silence of the alien fortress like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Commander Elias Ward froze, hands still hovering in the space where he and the Queen had shared the silent communion of memory and gesture. He turned toward the viewport, and there it was, the human fleet, a cascade of metallic hulls and weapons arrays stretching across the void, their formation perfect, disciplined, and deadly. Every cannon, every energy array, every missile tube was aimed at the structure he had just touched, the palace of light and veins that now pulsed with life. "Commander Ward, do you read?" Lieutenant Maravas's voice broke through the calm but urgent. "Orders are clear. Confirm target acquisition. The structure cannot be allowed to remain. Do you copy?" Elias swallowed hard, his mind torn. The structure was alive. The Queen, last of her kind, had awakened because of him. And yet the fleet did not know. They saw only an unknown formation, an anomaly in space. Protocol demanded destruction. Humanity demanded it. Survival depended on it. And he had only moments to decide. He turned back to the chamber. The Queen's luminous eyes met his, glowing with an intelligence that made fear feel like a foolish luxury. She extended her hand, a subtle gesture that carried warning, urgency, and something he could barely name, trust. He felt the pulse of the fortress beneath him intensify, syncing with the rhythm of her presence. "You must listen," he whispered, though the words were for himself more than for her. "There's something else." Her memories flooded into him as he touched her hand again. Not of her empire, not of her fall, but of a threat older, wider, more relentless than any war humanity had ever fought. Massive fleets swallowed by stars, worlds evaporated, civilizations extinguished before they could understand the danger. And all of it had been set in motion long before human eyes opened to the cosmos. The pulse of the fortress wasn't just alive. It was a warning, a guardian, a beacon against a force that would consume both alien and human alike if left unchecked. He staggered back, mind reeling. The Queen's eyes bore into him with urgency. Every gesture, every pulse of her being screamed, "Trust the bond, trust the connection, or all will be lost." And yet, the human fleet's communications crackled insistently, commands pouring in like bullets, each one demanding compliance. Destroy the anomaly, eliminate the threat, protect humanity. Elias's hands trembled. He felt the full weight of his choice pressing against him. Obey the fleet and kill the last living queen of an extinct empire, or defy orders and risk humanity's wrath, perhaps even its annihilation if he failed to contain what he now sensed as a larger danger. And in the background, the pulse of the fortress throbbed with impatience, warning him that hesitation was not an option. He activated his shuttle's external sensors to relay a warning, but the systems failed, interference unlike anything humanity had recorded before. The dead zone, the alien structure, the Queen herself, everything interfered with human technology. He realized, with a mixture of awe and dread, that the fleet would not understand. They would act. And if they did, centuries of life, culture, and history could end in minutes. The queen extended her hand again, closer this time, and Elias stepped toward her. He felt the pulse of the fortress merge with the pulse of her being. Through their contact, the threat became clear, not abstract, not distant, but immediate. It was intelligent, adaptive, unstoppable unless approached with understanding rather than force. Her gesture was simple, yet it spoke volumes. Humanity must not destroy what could save them. The fleet's first warning shots shattered the silence. Energy beams arced through the void, striking the perimeter of the alien structure. Light exploded against the walls, scattering in iridescent patterns, but the pulses of the fortress absorbed the hits, redistributing the energy in shimmering currents that ran across its surface. The queen's glow intensified, her hand guiding Elias's, and he felt the full weight of the structure's sentience responding. It was not just defense, it was communication. A demonstration of power, yes, but also a message. They could survive if only the humans would listen. Elias knew he had to act. "I can't let them fire," he muttered, more to himself than to the queen. His mind raced. He sent a single encrypted burst, a fragmentary warning, to the fleet. "Do not attack. Unknown intelligence. Potential ally." The response was silence. The fleet interpreted the warning as static, an error. Seconds passed like hours, every moment charged with the potential for catastrophe. He took a deep breath, stepping fully into the chamber, hand pressed firmly against hers. The pulses of the fortress intensified, wrapping around them like a living shield. Light coursed through his veins, not painfully, but vividly, connecting him to the queen and to the structure itself. He felt her history, her fear, her hope, and now, remarkably, the possibility of a shared future. And then, a voice, not audible, not spoken, but present in his mind, resonated through the connection. "There is a greater war. One that began before your kind existed. You must choose." The fleet fired again. The alien pulses flared brighter, rippling across the hull of the fortress and outward into the void. Elias felt the vibrations in his bones. In his mind, the intensity nearly overwhelming. He raised his hand toward the viewport, attempting a signal, a plea, anything to halt the humans. But their formations were relentless, automated, trained to obey orders without hesitation. Humanity's instinct for survival, for control, for domination, collided violently with the unknown. And yet the queen held steady. Her gaze was unwavering, her presence commanding. Elias realized that their bond, the pulse, the shared touch, the silent communication, was more than a connection. It was leverage. It was proof that intelligence, awareness, and history could not be measured by weapons or commands. That sometimes survival required understanding, not destruction. He clenched his fists, struggling against both fear and awe. One choice could destroy them all. One hesitation could doom two species. Yet the pulse of the fortress, the rhythm of her memories, and the intensity of her gaze whispered an undeniable truth. "I trust you. Do not fail me." And in that suspended moment, suspended between the fury of humanity and the silent intelligence of a dying empire, Elias made a decision. One that would alter the course of both human history and alien legacy. One that would bind him irrevocably to the queen, to the pulse, and to the mysteries that awaited in the heart of the dead zone. The air, or whatever passed for it, thickened with energy. The fortress glowed brighter than any star in his viewport. Light spread outward, a shield, a warning, and a promise all at once. And somewhere deep in the pulse, he felt it. The beginning of a war that had never truly ended, yet now, for the first time, a chance to reshape it. Elias's hand tightened on the queen's. The human fleet was closing fast, weapons primed, orders clear. Yet the fortress waited, alive, patient, watching. And as the first beams of energy struck, he realized that survival was no longer about obedience. It was about courage, understanding, and the bond that had just begun to form across the impossible gulf between two species. The chamber pulsed with light and energy, but it felt different now. Tense, brittle, fragile. Commander Elias Ward stood close to the queen, hand still pressed against hers, sensing the fortress itself tremble with an urgency he could not fully comprehend. Her luminous eyes, usually calm and commanding, flickered with faint shadows of pain. The pulse that had guided him across the dead zone now faltered, uneven and weak, as if the Empire itself were holding its breath. She looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something heavier, almost pleading. The rhythm of the fortress beneath their feet faltered in tandem with her, and Elias felt it in his bones, a resonance deeper than any sensor could measure. The queen's body, tall, elegant, otherworldly, shimmered, translucence deepening as if she were dissolving from within. And then, in the silent language of touch and pulse, she reached out more insistently, pressing her hands to his chest, aligning her heartbeat with his. Elias gasped as an invisible wave surged through him. Pain and memory, joy and loss, triumph and betrayal, centuries of it, flooded into his mind. He staggered, nearly falling, but she anchored him, guiding the torrent. Her life force, fragile and dwindling, intertwined with his own, and he understood immediately. She was giving him everything, every fragment of her existence, her legacy, her suffering. He saw her world through her eyes, towering spires carved from living crystal, cities that shimmered under alien suns, forests that glowed with bioluminescent life. He felt the loyalty of her subjects, the devotion of her fleets, the pride of centuries of achievement. And then the betrayals, the whispered conspiracies of her children, the fleets turned against her, the allies who abandoned her in the dead zone, the empire crumbling like fragile glass. He tasted her grief, each loss burning into him as if it were his own. The queen's memories twisted and surged, and Elias felt something even more profound, her love. Love for her people, for the world she had built, and for the very pulse of life she had sworn to protect. It was fierce, unyielding, heartbreaking. He saw the sacrifices she had made, the loneliness she had endured, the despair she had concealed beneath centuries of duty. And through it all, a quiet hope persisted. A hope that one day, someone somewhere would understand, would carry the torch she had guarded so long. Pain hit him like a physical blow. The merging of life forces was not gentle. It demanded every fragment of his strength. He stumbled, gripping the crystalline floor, feeling the queen's essence push into him. A tide of memory and energy so intense it threatened to overwhelm his mind entirely. Images of death, fire, betrayal, exile, love, and courage collided in his consciousness. And then clarity. He saw her true form, not the luminous, elegant figure he had first seen, but something more. A being of pure energy and light, infinitely complex, layered with tendrils of power and intelligence that defied human comprehension. Her skin shimmered like living glass, veins glowing with currents of history and thought, eyes reflecting the weight of centuries. The queen was not merely alive. She was the embodiment of her civilization, a living archive of triumphs and tragedies, victories and mistakes, joys and heartbreaks spanning eons. Elias's own heartbeat synchronized with hers. He felt her pain as acutely as his own, each memory a dagger, each triumph a spark of warmth. He understood the exile, the solitude, the endless vigil she had endured in the cold void of space. And yet, through the pain, through the centuries, he also felt the hope, the enduring will, the courage that had kept her alive all this time. The merging changed him, not physically, at least not yet, but fundamentally. He was no longer merely human. Part of her lived in him, and part of him had become an anchor for her essence. He could feel the pulse of her empire, the intelligence that had watched across the stars, the living corridors of the fortress itself, responding to his presence. The queen's life force stabilized, not entirely, but enough to draw her from the brink. And as he steadied her energy with his own, he realized the depth of the bond they now shared. Through this communion, he also glimpsed the threat she had hinted at before, the unseen danger lurking beyond both human and alien reach. Its nature was vast, intelligent, relentless, and patient, consuming worlds without mercy. He saw fleets falling, stars dimming, civilizations erased before comprehension. And he understood, in a way that transcended words, that the Queen's survival was not just about preservation of a species. It was about defense against a force far older and more merciless than humanity had ever faced. The Queen's pulse, previously erratic and weakening, began to strengthen, flowing through him in waves of light and heat. He felt her gratitude, but more than that, her trust, her willingness to share the weight of her existence. The fortress around them shimmered, responding to their shared bond, light weaving across the walls and ceilings in flowing currents of power. The air, thick with energy, seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their combined life forces. Elias realized something impossible yet undeniable. He could carry her legacy, her memory, and her strength, and through that, perhaps even guide humanity and her people toward survival. The merging had given him insight into alien technology, the secrets of her civilization, and the pathways to counter threats that had existed for millennia. And yet, the process was draining, relentless, pushing the limits of his body and mind. He could not falter. If he did, she could perish, and with her, centuries of knowledge and the pulse of a civilization would vanish. The Queen's form shimmered fully now, energy radiating outward in a silent crescendo. She reached toward him, guiding his hands across her chest, teaching him the patterns of her pulse, the language of her being, the rhythm that bound her life to the fortress and to the cosmos itself. Each touch was a lesson, a transfer of knowledge, a revelation of emotion and history too vast to convey through words alone. Elias staggered but held firm, absorbing, integrating, understanding. He felt her love and loss, her triumphs and failures, as if they were his own. He saw her true vulnerability, her enduring courage, and the depth of what she had protected for eons. And through it all, a singular thought crystallized in his mind. The bond they now shared could change everything, for humans and aliens alike. But the process was not without cost. His breath came in shallow gasps, energy leaving him as her pulse intertwined with his own. Every memory, every feeling, every fragment of centuries of life pressed against his consciousness, threatening to overwhelm him. Yet he could not let go. To release her now would be to destroy centuries of survival and knowledge, and perhaps even doom both species. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pulse between them steadied. The Queen's energy, once weak and faltering, now resonated through him in harmony. He could feel the fortress alive around them, aware, responsive. He could feel her presence fully, her consciousness intertwined with his own, a partnership forged in desperation and courage. And he understood, in a clarity deeper than any human experience, that their bond was now the pulse of two worlds, a bridge between human and alien, past and future, survival and hope. Elias's eyes met hers, and he knew words were no longer necessary. They had transcended communication. Every gesture, every pulse, every shared memory spoke volumes. Trust, understanding, unity, and the unspoken promise that, together, they could face whatever threat lay beyond the stars. And in that moment, as light and energy cascaded around them, he glimpsed the first hint of her true majesty. A form not bound by physicality, a consciousness immense and brilliant, yet intimately connected to him, fragile and human enough to rely on courage and empathy to endure. The Queen had entrusted him with her centuries of life, her knowledge, her memories, and her strength. And in return, he had accepted the burden, the bond, and the infinite responsibility that came with it. The void roared with light and metal. Commander Elias Ward hovered at the center of the alien fortress, now fully pulsing with energy drawn from the Queen, his body glowing faintly blue, veins illuminated with an intensity that mirrored hers. Outside the transparent walls of the chamber, the human fleet had advanced to attack range, weapons primed, missiles locked, and cannons humming with destructive energy. Every moment brought the inevitable, obliteration of the fortress, death of the Queen, and perhaps the destruction of whatever ancient intelligence lingered within. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps, his hands trembling, but he held firm. He felt the Queen's pulse inside him, a rhythm of light, memory, and warning. She was weak, drained from merging her essence with his. Yet every fragment of her consciousness screamed for survival, for understanding, for a chance to avert catastrophe. He could not let the fleet fire, not now, not ever. "Stop! Stop! You don't understand!" he shouted into the comms, though he knew his words would barely register. "There's life here, intelligence. Don't destroy it." The fleet's response was predictable. Automated commands, warnings, and ultimatums, all drowned in the hum of engines and targeting arrays. Humanity demanded compliance. Humanity demanded annihilation of the unknown. And yet, Elias's hands glowed as the alien energy coursed through him, a bridge between species, a conduit for power and warning alike. He stepped onto the outer platform, the chamber's translucent floor resonating with every pulse, amplifying the intensity of his glow. The Queen's presence surged through him, filling his mind with her centuries of memory and emotion. Fear, pride, anger, love, sorrow. He could feel her warning, her dread, and the growing threat she had sensed for eons. It was all here, a torrent of existence compressed into moments, pushing him to act, to protect, to survive. The fleet fired. Missiles streaked through the void, energy beams lanced the darkness, and the alien fortress shimmered under the assault, veins of light flaring with each impact. Elias raised his arms, the energy from the Queen surging outward, forming a protective aura that deflected the first volleys. He shouted, not in command, but in warning, his voice carrying through the chamber, through the pulse, and across the void. "Stop! You're destroying what you cannot understand." The Queen's psychic scream cut through the communications of both fleets. It was not sound, not noise, but an unearthly resonance that shattered every sensor and comm channel within range. The message was absolute. Stop. The intensity of her presence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of psychic energy that left no human or alien mind untouched. Fleet commanders screamed in confusion, systems overloaded, targeting arrays faltering. Weapons discharged accidentally, some detonating prematurely, others shutting down entirely. The fleets froze, unable to act against the force they did not comprehend. Elias stepped fully onto the platform, the alien energy now fully integrated with his own being. His body radiated light, tendrils of power stretching outward, wrapping the fortress in a protective cocoon. He felt the pulse of the Queen, the heartbeat of her civilization, and the awareness of the dead zone itself flowing through him. He was no longer merely human. He was the vessel for an intelligence older and more powerful than humanity had ever faced. And he understood the cost. If he faltered, if fear overcame him, the fortress, the Queen, and perhaps even the fleet could be lost. The Queen's eyes met his fully. Though weakened, she projected clarity, a shared thought that echoed across the psychic bond. Trust. Stand. Protect. Let them see. Elias nodded, feeling her presence strengthen his resolve. He raised both hands, the energy coiling and spinning around him, illuminating the void with arcs of blue and white that danced over the fleets like lightning across a stormy sea. Human ships hesitated. Energy shields flared against the psychic pressure. Sensors struggled to read the anomalies in power radiating from the fortress. Pilots whispered over comms, but all commands faltered under the intensity of the Queen's warning, transmitted through Elias. He was the bridge, the mediator, the proof that not all humans were destroyers, that understanding and courage could transcend fear and orders. The Queen's memories poured fully into him again, showing centuries of conflict, betrayals, victories, and losses. He understood the sacrifices she had endured, the world she had protected, and the hope that had carried her through isolation and stasis. And now all of that history flowed through him, informing every instinct, every decision, every action. Elias's voice rang out across the chamber, across the void, across the frozen corridors of the human fleet. This is not a weapon. This is life. We do not destroy what we cannot comprehend. We protect it. Pull back or all will be lost. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, human captains ordered evasive maneuvers, their weapons faltering, shields holding against the inexplicable surge of energy. The alien fortress did not attack. It only radiated the Queen's presence through Elias, a warning, a message, a plea. And in that silence, a fragile understanding began to form, not fully, but enough to halt the immediate assault. The Queen, still weak, projected another wave of psychic energy, a more subtle one this time, threading through Elias into the minds of fleet commanders. They glimpsed the pulse of the fortress, the depth of intelligence contained within, and the centuries of existence now entrusted to him. Curiosity tempered fear, or replaced urgency. Orders wavered, and for the first time humans hesitated in the void, questioning, wondering, realizing that they faced not merely a structure, but a sentient being, ancient and magnificent. Elias lowered his hands slightly, the glow dimming but still radiant. The Queen's presence remained within him, guiding, steadying, sustaining. Together, they stood at the center of the storm, a human and an alien queen, a bridge between two species, a living testament to courage and understanding. The fleets were still tense, weapons ready, but their fire had ceased. In the void, amid the echoes of destruction and warning, a fragile peace had formed. And yet, Elias knew it was only temporary. The unseen threat the Queen had warned of still loomed beyond, waiting, patient and relentless. The human fleet's fear had been checked, but not erased. The pulse of the fortress and the bond with the Queen had survived, but both were vulnerable, a spark against the darkness of space. He looked at her, and in her luminous eyes, he saw centuries of history, pain, and hope, mirrored in his own reflection. The storm of fire had passed, for now, but the war for understanding, for survival, and for the future of both species was only beginning. Elias drew a deep breath, letting the alien energy settle, feeling the pulse of the Queen resonate through every fiber of his being. In the silence that followed, only one certainty remained. No human order, no fleet, no weapon could erase what had begun here. The bond had been forged, the pulse had been shared, and humanity, for the first time, glimpsed the scale of what lay beyond the stars. Both terrifying and magnificent, deadly and wondrous, ancient and alive. Elias raised his eyes to the void, toward the waiting fleets, toward the unseen threat that had yet to make its move, and whispered, not into comms, not into words, but into the pulse itself. We will survive. Together, the fortress shimmered, alive and breathing, and the Queen's presence strengthened within him. The storm had passed, but the fire that would change the fate of two civilizations, had only just begun. The chamber was bathed in the cold glow of alien light, the fortress vibrating faintly under the weight of its own intelligence. Commander Elias Ward stood at the center, his body still radiating the faint blue pulse of the Queen's energy, every nerve alive with the memory and strength she had shared. Outside, the human fleet lingered, not attacking now, but ready, engines humming, weapons locked, eyes fixed on the fortress that had proven more alive and formidable than any of them could comprehend. The Queen hovered before him, tall and radiant, her luminous form flickering with exhaustion and brilliance intertwined. She spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in thought, a clear projection that Elias could feel reverberate through his chest. I will give myself. Spare the children. Preserve my line. Let humanity see mercy, and perhaps wisdom will follow. Elias's hands trembled. Her offer was unprecedented. Surrendering herself, the last living queen of an ancient empire, was not merely a plea. It was a calculated act of trust, of hope, of surrender to the judgment of another species. He could feel her centuries of pain, love, and pride converging into this single, heart-wrenching moment. Yet even as he understood her intent, he knew the risk. The human admiral, rigid, unyielding, would not accept words, pleas, or promises. Authority demanded proof, blood, submission. He hesitated, searching her glowing eyes, which seemed to read him as deeply as he read her pulse. Do you trust them? She asked silently, and he felt the weight of centuries in the question. Trust humanity? Could they see beyond fear and orders? Could he protect her, her legacy, her children, without losing himself, or the very life they had fought to save? The Admiral's voice shattered the fragile silence, transmitted across the comms with the unmistakable authority of rigid command. Commander Ward, orders are clear. Surrender the Queen. Her life or yours, your choice. But know this, if she is to live, you will bring her head. Anything else is unacceptable. Elias's pulse quickened, his mind a storm of conflict. The Queen had offered herself, pure and unarmed, a beacon of hope, a living bridge between two species. And yet the Admiral demanded an act of violence, proof of conquest, a token of dominance that would destroy everything they had built together. His jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed that he could not comply. Not with orders, not with reason, not with the centuries of memory, trust, and hope now residing inside him. He turned back to the Queen. She shimmered, luminous energy flickering in fatigue, yet her gaze remained steady, unwavering. Do not fail them. Do not fail yourself, she projected, a whisper of courage threading through his thoughts. Elias placed a hand over his chest, feeling the pulse of her life within him, the bond that had become more than connection. It was survival, it was understanding, it was history itself. The human fleet's weapons thrummed ominously outside, the Admiral's patience thinning. Commander, this is your last warning. Surrender her or we engage. You know the consequences. Elias felt the Queen's presence ripple with intensity, a psychic flaring of energy that seemed to stretch the walls and ceilings of the fortress. No, she communicated, calm but absolute. This is not surrender. This is survival. This is the bridge they must see. You must stand. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, fully illuminated in her light, arms outstretched, facing the fleet alone. Every human sensor, every captain, every soldier could see him, the pulse of alien energy visible across their instruments, tangible, overwhelming. He spoke, not with comms, not with words, but through gesture and projection of energy. Do not fire. You will see reason. You will see mercy. The Admiral's response was swift, cold, and unwavering. You are in violation of orders. Cease immediately, or your ship is expendable. Elias felt a surge of resolve, the Queen's memories flooding him again. Her triumphs, her battles, her love and grief compressed into a torrent of understanding. And with it came the truth. Proof of mercy, of courage, of humanity's potential, would not come through compliance. It would come through defiance. He raised his hands higher, the alien energy coiling, pulsing, and surging outward like a living storm. The fortress itself seemed to respond, veins of light arcing across the walls, through the corridors, radiating toward the fleet. He could feel the pulse of the Queen, guiding him, bolstering him, merging with his own determination. A tense silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of energy and the distant engines of warships waiting, ready, hungry for action. Then, the Queen's psychic presence flared once more, a resonance that shattered all comms across both armadas. Every pilot, every commander, every weapon system quivered under the force of her warning. Do not harm. Do not kill. Witness. Human systems glitched, weapons discharged prematurely, shields flared, and confusion rippled across the fleet. Elias stood firm, fully illuminated, unarmed except for the bond he carried, the pulse of an empire coursing through his veins. He did not hesitate. This was the choice. Protect the Queen's children, defy orders, and hope humanity would recognize courage over conquest, mercy over destruction. The Queen's form dimmed slightly, exhaustion weighing on her after centuries of sharing life and memory. But Elias felt the heartbeat of her empire, steady now, amplified by the unity they had forged. He knew what had to be done. Not surrender, not blood, but demonstration. A bridge, built on courage and understanding, between human and alien, past and future, survival and hope. He faced the void, the fleet, and whispered, not words, but intention, presence, and pulse. See what I see. Feel what I feel. This is life, not a threat. The chamber vibrated, light cascading like fire across walls and corridors, a display of alien brilliance and the pulse of centuries. The fleet wavered. The admiral's voice cracked, frustration seeping into his commands, hesitation breaking through rigidity. Humans glimpsed, for the first time, something beyond fear. Intelligence, legacy, and the weight of history. The Queen's children, hidden within the fortress, their forms small, delicate, luminous, shifted slightly, responding to the energy that protected them. Elias's pulse synced with theirs, the bridge complete. He realized then that the choice had already been made. Not by him, not by the admiral, but by the bond itself, forged in courage, in trust, and in the willingness to defy destruction for life. And as the human fleet hesitated, confused, unsure, Elias understood a simple truth. Some victories are not won through force. Some battles are not fought with weapons. And some bonds, like the one he now carried, were powerful enough to bend fear, obedience, and centuries of expectation into a new possibility. The Queen's glow stabilized, radiant but tired, and Elias felt her gratitude flow into him, a silent whisper threaded with centuries of wisdom and hope. The choice was clear, though perilous. Stand, protect, endure. Humanity might resist, might fear, might even strike again, but the bridge had been built. The children were safe, for now, and the pulse of an empire had found an unexpected guardian. Outside, the fleet's weapons still hovered, engines thrummed, and the admiral's orders remained unyielding. Yet in that silence, in the shimmer of light, in the steady heartbeat of alien energy merged with human courage, a fragile victory had been claimed. Not conquest, not surrender, but understanding. And in the quiet before the storm of retaliation could begin, Elias realized the first step toward a future neither species could have predicted was already underway. The fortress pulsed like a living heart, veins of light stretching outward through corridors and chambers, carrying the weight of millennia. Commander Elias Ward moved through the luminous halls, each step resonating with the faint hum of alien life, each pulse echoing the Queen's presence still intertwined with his own. He felt her calling him, faint but insistent, the urgency threading through his consciousness like a current of electricity. Outside, the human fleet waited, engines thrumming, sensors scanning, commanders shouting over crackling comms. Yet something had changed. Every instrument, every display, every system that measured, tracked, or surveilled flickered with anomaly, as if sensing not merely a structure, but a sentient intelligence at its core. And that intelligence was reaching for him, reaching for them, a bridge between two species that neither fully understood. He reached the chamber where the Queen hovered, luminous energy radiating from her fragile, elegant form. She was weaker than before, but the connection they shared had deepened, merging further with every heartbeat, every pulse, every memory. Elias extended his hands, and she reached back. The moment their fingers touched, a shockwave of energy surged through the fortress, through him, through the void outside. It was not destructive, but transformative. An awakening, a rebirth, a signal broadcast not just across the chamber, but across light years of space. Their minds intertwined, thoughts and memories flowing freely, seamlessly. He felt her triumphs, her pain, her centuries of isolation and betrayal. He shared his own humanity, the fear, the courage, the hope, the determination that had driven him to defy orders, to risk everything, to protect life beyond his own species. The two consciousnesses merged, a tapestry of experience, emotion, and insight that transcended the physical, the biological, and even the technological. In that shared mind, they created something new. Not human, not alien, but both, a hybrid awareness that pulsed with intelligence and empathy, logic and emotion, strategy and memory. The fortress responded, corridors shimmering with currents of light that mirrored the merging of their consciousness. Systems coming alive as if recognizing not a ruler or invader, but a unified mind. Across the galaxy, sensors flickered to life. Systems long dormant, instruments abandoned, communications arrays long silent. They all reacted, detecting an anomaly, a presence that could not be ignored. Human outposts, alien satellites, exploratory probes, all sensed the pulse. And everywhere, operators paused, instruments glitching, compasses spinning, lights blinking. Something had awakened. Something that could see beyond borders, beyond species, beyond conventional understanding. Elias felt the enormity of it. The Queen's memories, her pain, her hopes, now intertwined with his courage, his adaptability, his humanity. And through that, the fortress itself, the last living remnant of a vanished empire, awoke fully, alive, aware, responsive, and ready. He could feel it breathing, thinking, observing, connecting. Every hall, every chamber, every vein of living crystal pulsed in unison. A single organism driven by a consciousness neither wholly human nor alien. The human fleet outside sensed it too, their sensors detecting impossible energy signatures, systems struggling to interpret the data. Alarm sirens rang across ships, weapons systems faltered, and commanders shouted incomprehensible orders, only to be drowned by the silent hum that emanated from the fortress. The pulse was everywhere, yet nowhere. A sentient field that reached into every sensor, every mind, every system. Elias closed his eyes, letting the energy flow fully. He understood now that their bond was more than survival. It was a signal, a message, a new form of life reaching across the void to ensure continuity, understanding, and perhaps reconciliation. The Queen's children, hidden within the fortress, responded instinctively, the energy resonating with them as if recognizing the new consciousness. They shimmered faintly, luminous and aware, part of the new life forming before the galaxy's eyes. A wave of psychic energy pulsed outward, subtle but undeniable, touching the human fleet and every nearby outpost. Fear, curiosity, awe, it stirred all three simultaneously. Operators stared at instruments that defied comprehension, navigational systems showing anomalies that could not exist, sensors detecting consciousness where none should be. And across the galaxy, from 1,000 light-years away, every system attuned to the pulse flickered to life, responding as if recognizing a master signal, an awakening intelligence that bridged the chasm between species. Elias felt the Queen's presence in every thought, every pulse, every rhythm. Their consciousness was no longer separate. They were a single entity in terms of understanding and purpose, each amplifying the other, each stabilizing the bond that had begun as touch, as gesture, as trust. And in that unity, he realized the scale of what they had begun. A new entity, a new intelligence, capable of seeing beyond conflict, beyond fear, beyond species, capable of guiding, protecting, and influencing life on a scale neither human nor alien had previously imagined. The fortress walls glowed, veins of light flowing like rivers of thought, corridors alive with movement, energy, and life. The Queen's voice, or rather, the merged consciousness they now shared, spoke within him, not as words but as understanding. This is the first step. The bridge is built. The galaxy will notice. Humanity will notice. And they will have no choice but to see what has begun. Elias felt the pulse intensify, spreading outward, reaching the edges of sensor arrays, distant fleets, and long-abandoned observatories. Light-years away, systems long dead hummed, instruments reacted, and networks flickered, alive once more. The touch that had started in a single chamber now rippled across the galaxy, unseen yet undeniable, a declaration that a new force had emerged, intelligent, aware, and powerful enough to redefine the balance between human and alien, past and future, war and understanding. The Queen's children stirred in response, responding instinctively to the merged consciousness, their small luminous forms resonating with the pulse, indicating the continuation of life, the survival of her line, and the preservation of hope. And Elias knew with absolute certainty that their future, human and alien alike, was now inseparable, intertwined in ways that could not be undone. Outside, the human fleet remained frozen, their sensors overloading, their minds struggling to interpret the anomaly. Some felt fear, others awe, but all were united in the recognition of something unprecedented, something alive, something that had grown beyond them, beyond orders, beyond comprehension. And in the quiet aftermath of the pulse, Elias realized the truth. Nothing would ever be the same again. Not for humanity, not for the alien species, not for the galaxy itself. The touch that had begun as a simple gesture of courage and trust had changed everything. Life would endure. Empires might fall. Wars might rage. But something new had emerged. An intelligence born of trust, courage, and the audacity to connect across impossible boundaries. He opened his eyes and met the Queen's gaze, now a shared consciousness radiating outward through him. The pulse subsided slightly, leaving ripples of energy that continued to resonate, signaling the beginning of a new era. And somewhere, in the silence of the galaxy, systems flickered to life, sensors aligned, and the universe felt the first stirrings of something extraordinary, born from the courage of a single human and the last queen of an ancient empire. Elias's breath caught, the enormity of their act sinking in. The galaxy was listening now, responding now, and for the first time humanity's arrogance, its fear, its potential for greatness, all of it was intertwined with the pulse of an alien legacy reborn. And in that moment, he understood the depth of their achievement. The bond had been forged, the consciousness created, and across the galaxy, every mind attuned to the pulse would now bear witness to the touch that had changed everything. The war that had stretched across light years, fueled by fear, misunderstanding, and the unyielding drive to dominate, finally fell silent. The human fleet, once poised for destruction, hovered in suspended disbelief, engines humming quietly as sensors recorded anomalies that defied comprehension. The fortress, alive and radiant with the pulse of the hybrid consciousness, had become both beacon and shield. Commander Elias Ward, still glowing faintly with alien energy, stood at the heart of the chamber, the Queen's essence intertwined with his own, a shared consciousness that bridged species, history, and perception itself. Outside, the void of space seemed calmer, almost reverent. The fleets, human and otherwise, felt it too, a presence, neither threatening nor submissive, but profound in its existence. The hybrid consciousness emanated understanding and empathy, a transmission of memory and experience that transcended language, culture, and fear. Battles paused not through command, not through power, but through the undeniable clarity that life, intelligence, and courage were intertwined and sacred. Elias moved through the chamber, feeling the pulse of her species, of the fortress, and of himself unified. Each step resonated with centuries of experience. Victories, losses, betrayals, love, and hope, all woven into a tapestry that reached across the galaxy. The Queen's children emerged from hidden chambers, luminous and aware, their presence subtle yet powerful, responding instinctively to the consciousness that now connected all of them. Together, they became more than the sum of their parts, a living testament to unity, resilience, and shared understanding. The human fleet gradually aligned, sensors adjusting, systems stabilizing, minds comprehending what had once seemed impossible. Pilots and commanders felt the memories, the experiences, the shared courage flowing through Elias. Not as threat, not as conquest, but as invitation. To see, to understand, to evolve. In that moment, fear gave way to awe, arrogance softened into curiosity, and hesitation blossomed into the first fragile seeds of trust. Across the galaxy, the hybrid consciousness reached, brushing distant colonies, long-abandoned outposts, and even silent satellites. Systems flickered to life as if responding to a call, sensors detecting the pulse of history, of memory, of intelligence. Human and alien alike began to sense a new pattern, a rhythm of coexistence and understanding that had never existed before. Legends would later speak of this moment, not as a battle won or lost, but as a turning point, the instant where courage bridged worlds. Elias felt the weight of it all, the centuries of the Queen's life, her empire's legacy, the lives of her children, and the trust she had placed in him. He had touched her, defied orders, and carried the burden of what was now far greater than himself. And yet, despite the enormity, there was serenity in their connection, a quiet understanding that the hybrid consciousness was no longer fragile. It had endured the storm of fire, the demands of war, and the test of fear, emerging as a guiding light for the galaxy. Time, once measured in battles and fleets, now stretched differently. Centuries passed, and humanity evolved alongside the remnants of the Queen's civilization. Hybrid minds, informed by memory, empathy, and courage, influenced decisions, exploration, and understanding. Wars became rarer, diplomacy richer, and curiosity, tempered by awareness, became a defining trait. Among historians, storytellers, and explorers, one tale stood above all. Of the human who had dared to reach out, to touch an alien queen, and in that gesture, changed the course of the stars forever. In the archives of both species, records shimmered with the light of hybrid intelligence. Children of alien and human lineages played together, glowing faintly with traces of energy, embodying centuries of trust and courage. The fortress itself became a living museum, alive yet peaceful, each pulse of its corridors a story of sacrifice, bravery, and the bridging of worlds. Those who entered could feel the Queen's presence, sense Elias's resolve, and understand, on a level beyond words, the power of daring to act with empathy against impossible odds. Legends spread among explorers, traders, and historians. Whispers of a single human, standing against the tide of orders, fear, and destruction, who had touched a queen, shared her life, and forged a consciousness that transcended species. Songs were composed, holographic records created, and monuments erected, yet none could truly capture the enormity of what had occurred. To witness the hybrid consciousness was to experience centuries of life and love, triumph and loss, courage and hope, all at once. A reminder of what one act of bravery could accomplish. And so the stars themselves seemed changed. Nebulas shimmered with a faint resonance of the pulse, systems aligned with a harmony that had never existed before, and life, in all its forms, began to understand that courage and trust could forge paths impossible to predict. Elias walked through the fortress, hand glowing faintly as it passed through corridors alive with memory, feeling the Queen's presence steady and infinite, a light beyond fear, a pulse beyond comprehension. He understood now that their act had created more than survival, it had created legacy. The Queen's life, humanity's potential, and the bridge they had forged existed simultaneously, inseparable and enduring. Across the galaxy, those who were sensitive to the pulse felt it as inspiration, as warning, as invitation. And somewhere, deep in the void, systems long abandoned, stars long dormant, and civilizations long forgotten hummed in acknowledgement of what had been set into motion. Elias's gaze lifted to the stars, radiant and infinite, knowing that the courage to act, to touch, to bridge fear and alien majesty, had transformed everything. The war had ended, but the story of their bond, their shared consciousness, and the light they had created would resonate for centuries to come, guiding humanity, honoring the Queen, and illuminating a future where understanding and bravery were stronger than fear. And in the quiet pulse of the fortress, amid the laughter of children, the hum of hybrid intelligence, and the soft glow of stars beyond, one simple truth endured. A single touch, born of trust and courage, had changed the galaxy forever. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if acknowledging that bravery, empathy, and connection were forces stronger than any weapon, any order, any fear. And somewhere in the infinite darkness, a new era had begun, one born of a human's courage, an alien queen's hope, and the light that shone beyond fear.